your posts about discovering that you had been diagnosed with autism as an adult. Um, Talk a little bit about what the impact has been for you.
So growing up, my parents thought that it could be possible that I was on the spectrum. However, just when you study about autism, you find that it's very hard for girls and women to get diagnosed, and that was even more difficult in the '90s when I was growing up. And it's also true for people of color. So I was definitely in the category of people that don't typically look like what someone would expect an autistic person to look like. So as a result, I just traveled throughout my whole life dealing with sensory issues, dealing with communication challenges and things, and never really being able to make sense of it. And then when I was 27, I kind of started to realize like, wait, a lot of the stuff that I felt like I was supposed to like eventually get as an adult, like I'm like a real adult now. Like I'm almost 30. Like I gotta, I feel like something's not clicking. So I went to my doctor, just like my primary care doctor at the time, and I told him, I was like, years ago, I think, my family thought that maybe there could be a possibility that I was, on the autism spectrum. And before I could even get the question out good, he was just like, oh, you're perfectly normal. There's nothing to worry about. And sadly, I took his word and I just walked out of that doctor's office. And for several years, I just continued to struggle and doubt myself. And then it was during the lockdowns last year, during the pandemic, where I was on TikTok and TikTok showed me some videos of some women who have been diagnosed as adults. And it was just like everything clicked. And I was like, wow, they're explaining my whole life experience. So that was actually what led me to Googling and finding a specialist in my area. And thankfully, I was able to find someone. There aren't very many that oftentimes see adults. It can be a bit of a challenge to find, but I was able to find someone, and it
Yeah.
started this several month journey that eventually led to the diagnosis.
So, what were some of the symptoms that you were experiencing that really gave you this feeling that you might be autistic?
I don't really pick up well on like tone of voice. So I have a hard time picking up if someone's joking or being sarcastic. So even as a kid, like there were a lot of times I would just get laughed at because I would miss the joke and I would take what someone said literally, or even just certain figures of speech. I would take them literally. And for me, I just felt like, okay, at some point I'm going to grow up and catch on to all these little nuances and things, but I never did. The good side of it is that as an artist and a writer, because I have this really analytical brain, I'm able to do a lot of wordplay and like play on different things and switch things around. And there's a lot of freedom there. So even as a kid, I was really passionate about writing stories and coming up with characters and like making like my whole little own universe and all of that because I love to be able to play with words and kind of make sense of language in my own way, if that makes sense. So yeah, now when I go back and I still have right behind me, I still have my childhood journals. And when I look back in them, I can see it now. I'm like, wow, yeah, I was really kind of just in my own little world trying to figure it out. And then I also within my diagnosis, I also have a sensory processing disorder. So I'm very sensitive to sound and light and color. Everything just feels super saturated and loud to me. You may have even noticed, like when we first got on the Zoom, I kept adjusting my volume because I never know like how it's coming in for me. But that's another area where being an artist has, I mean, it's become a huge. I consider it a blessing. I consider it a good thing. I'm grateful for it because I can see colors within colors. I hear sounds within sounds, and it helps me. Yeah, it helps me find a lot of peace in life, actually. So, yeah, that's a little bit of what it's been like for me since I was a little kid.
So, what have you done with this information? Do you seek out other autistic people? What can you action from having that information?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that. I actually made my first like autistic friend and she lives near me and it was just It was such a moment of like joy and just like wow, like you get me and I don't have to like explain all of like these little things about myself. And at the same time, it was some like grief a little bit for all the years I did have that, like all the years like I wish I could have been like, hey, something might not be clicking because I'm autistic. It's not that I think you're weird or, or whatever. It takes me a minute. So I have been, especially online, I have been seeking out more, autistic voices and people to follow. Even though I have like a social media following, I'm very internet shy, so I'm still like really bad about like DMing people. I'm like, oh, I don't want to like bother them, but I'm slowly starting to overcome that and just say, hey, I just want to let you know because there's so many women out there who are speaking about their experiences, and I'm just like, even if I just let them know, like I appreciate them, I think that's valid. So I have been slowly becoming more vocal. I've been slowly sharing more of my story. That's another thing that's hard for me. I share a lot of art, but it's hard to share a story on the internet. Like it's a lot. So I've been slowly, I think, just getting more courage and being more open and candid with people. And it's been good, considering like the internet's kind of a wild place at times. Like I've had a lot of positive, mostly positive experiences, which has been very refreshing. So
What would you say to other adults who think that they might be autistic?
watch watch autistic creators, people, writers on YouTube, on TikTok. Even within the past, like since I've gotten diagnosed, I've seen more people getting their diagnosis and speaking up. I've even started to find on Instagram like pages for people of color who are autistic, like popping up within the past few months. So if you've ever felt discouraged of like, I don't know where to start, like, I don't know if my people are out there, it's a positive thing that more and more people are starting to share their voices. So just look up whatever your preferred platform of choice is. And the second thing is to Google in your area for specialists that see adults. That's a very important distinction because a lot of the research and support is for children, and it's a little bit different as adults because autism looks different. Hence why many of us here as adults, oh, you don't look autistic because people have a certain idea.
I know you have a new book. Tell us a little bit about the book, and it touches on the issue of brokenness.
So I started writing this book last year, and it started with a iPhone photo. I was sitting around at home like everybody else, just reflecting on a bunch of stuff that I did, and all my trips were canceled. I wasn't going anywhere, so I was looking through my phone and I found this photo, and it's the cover of the book. And I took it at sunrise, leaving Albuquerque one morning, and I had a thought to myself. I was like, "Isn't it so interesting how?" This is actually one of my favorite photos that I've ever taken. And at the same time, I was struggling so much when that photo was taken. And just from that photo, it led me on this physical journey around the US, all these places that I've lived and that I've visited and I've had stories and experiences in, and helping me see that like there's so much to learn from the landscape itself. Like even if we look back on our stories and we're not quite sure how to make sense of it, just start with the landscape. Are you surrounded by trees? Or are you on the Gulf? Or are you by the water? Just start there and see what nature and that environment itself can teach you. So yeah, that was a motivation because I knew that I was not alone in just in general, people trying to make sense of their stories, make sense of their lives. And that's a really big task that can be very intimidating. So it's my hope that through the art and poetry that it just kind of gives the reader like an invitation to kind of slowly maybe look through your own phone's camera roll and find photos that are symbolic of just the beauty and courage in your own life. So yeah, I always say I always feel like the biggest takeaway that I want people to have from this book is to do that. I hope it makes you close and say, okay, I'm going to go through my own phone now and find photos that reflect a time in my life that I just want to honor and have gratitude for.